The US economy is as large as the next four largest economies combined. This puts it in a unique situation when it comes to things like tax policy. Are the lessons learned from other economies necessarily relevant when you're talking about an economy as large and influential as the United States? Combine this with a natural human fear of the unknown, and you can understand why the hairs on the backs of the necks of economists all over the world stood on end when Kamala Harris started talking about taxing unrealized gains. The simplest example of what an unrealized gain is if you bought your house for $300,000 and it increased in value to $500,000, but you haven't sold it yet. Your total wealth has increased by $200,000, but you can't necessarily spend it. Unrealized gains have always been the Pandora's box of the US tax code. We've long understood what the problems were, and yet we don't have a good understanding of what will happen if we break the seal on unrealized gains. Now, the policy that Harris is proposing is not that big of a deal. It's a 25% minimum tax on people whose net worth is worth more than $100 million. That's only 11,000 people in the United States. Over 330 million people, it's only 0.003% of the population. Now, a minimum tax works pretty simply. If your net worth is $100 million and a year later it's $110 million, then you have to pay at least 25% on the increased $10 million, so 25% is $2.5 million. Now, if through the regular tax code you already owe taxes more than $2.5 million, then you don't have any increase in your taxes because this is a minimum tax. But if most of your wealth is tied up in things like real estate or the stock market, which is only taxed once you sell it, this is still an unrealized gain, then you have to pay at least $2.5 million in taxes that year, which might cause you to have to sell some of those assets like real estate and stock in order to raise enough money in order to pay the taxes. And this is one of the chief arguments against this tax policy, is that if you have a large, wealthy investor who has to start selling a lot of assets, it will have a detrimental impact on the real estate or stock market, which will affect the rest of this. Now, I have a hard time believing that some small fraction of 11,000 people selling assets is going to have some massive detrimental impact on the real estate or stock market, but you can understand where the argument comes from. So what is the problem with taxing unrealized gains? Well, first of all, we don't understand whether it's even legal. The 16th Amendment, which gives Congress the power to tax income, doesn't specify whether unrealized gains counts as income. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled recently, just this year in Moore versus US, that the Supreme Court does have the power to tax unrealized gains, but only in that situation. It specifically states in the ruling that this is not blanket approval or denial for taxing unrealized gains on a broader scale. This means if Harris and the Democrats did bring a proposal for taxing unrealized gains, the Supreme Court could rule on it either way. This brings me to the next major problem, which is if the Supreme Court rules in favor of taxing unrealized gains, it opens the Pandora's box, and we legitimately do not have a good understanding of what impact this is going to have on the economy. You can imagine if in 5 years they change the threshold from 100 million down to 10 million, that goes from affecting 0.003% of the population to over 1%. And that 1% owns a lot of real estate and a lot of stock. Forcing them to sell those assets in order to pay taxes on unrealized gains will undoubtedly have far-reaching impacts on the economy, or unintended consequences. The most common example given is farming and ranching. A farmer around here once told me the definition of farming is working yourself into poverty on $1 million piece of land. Well, more commonly these days, that's a $10 million or $100 million piece of land, even for small family farms. Farming and ranching often doesn't produce an income that is proportional to the value of the land. Taxing them on the unrealized gains of the growth of the land may drive a lot of farmers and ranchers out of business. You can, of course, always create exceptions for things like agriculture, but as soon as you create an exception, people will start gaming the system. All of a sudden, we have a bunch of billionaires who are doing the bare minimum of farming to qualify for the agriculture exception. We're of course not the first country in the world to consider taxing unrealized gains. Norway did so, but they're also 1/50th the size of our economy. They may not necessarily be relatable. For example, one of the major critiques of taxing unrealized gains is that wealthy people will leave looking for places where their wealth won't be taxed. This is exactly what happened in Norway. But the US is already the largest and most attractive economy in the world. Business people and wealthy people come here for a reason. There is a lot of opportunity. Taxing unrealized gains here in the US may not have the same impact that it did in Norway. The controversy over taxing unrealized gains has very little to do with the actual proposal from Harris and everything to do with a fear of the unknown and speculation as to what that policy might turn into in the future. Two very important concerns. Unfortunately, I'm not qualified to tell you what all this might turn into, and I'm not sure there really is anyone qualified. Which means this chalks up to another one of things that comes down to what your personal philosophy around taxation is. If you want to know my opinion, it is that this is one of those boxes we eventually need to open. Unrealized gains is simply a massive exception that a lot of people can use to avoid paying taxes while they build wealth. If you want to continue this series on the two different candidates' tax policies, then I'll put the next video here. Stick around the channel for similar content, and I will talk to you soon.